Hello, and welcome to the Social Connect. I'm your host, J.F. Whitaker, author of the book The Day Before I Died. The Social Connect was designed to have participants talk about and share about issues related to our social and mental well-being. Today's a little bit different. It's unique, it's special. I hope you enjoy it. What we want to do today is remember the shootings at Kent State University. May the 4th, 1970, troopers opened fire on unarmed protesters at Kent State University. The voices for peace were silenced. At that time, I was in Da Nang Air Force Base, Vietnam, and my brother Billy was there at Kent State fighting that battle. Billy and I were on opposite sides of the protest during that time frame. And so what I'd like to do is I'll present my version by reading you what I wrote in the book, The Day Before I Died. It's from chapter 2 called Controversy, and I may have underestimated the chapter title. The controversy at home consisted of more than just national protests against the war. Home was love-based, brotherly love. Not a clash of political ideologies or the angry protest aimed at the warmongers. My brother Billy was a protester. He was one of the leaders of the Students for a Democratic Society, protesting the United States' involvement in Vietnam. I believe if Billy's number had come up in the draft, he would have headed for Canada. He would have been among the estimated 500,000 men labeled draft dodgers who fled the United States, most headed to Canada to avoid conscription. I saw his packed bag. He was determined not to go to Vietnam. I, on the other hand, enrolled in a program called Aviation Reserve Officer Candidate, AVROC, Aviation Reserve Officer Candidate, not associated with Michigan State University. My training was unique and not like the ROTC programs. I trained for my military career during the summer in Pensacola, Florida, and worked toward my bachelor's degree at Michigan State during the winter. I was commissioned and awarded my wings on the day I graduated from college. My career started that day. My first assignment was called Operation Feedback. This is where the Navy sent me to the geographic area where I grew up and attended school. My mission required me to go from college to college in the Ohio-Michigan area to recruit more students to join the AVROC program. Uncle Sam sent 3 million men to wage this war. The extremely high death rate of our soldiers in Vietnam and the 500,000 men dodging to Canada and other locales left us in dire need of new recruits. We stood behind 6-foot tables handing out literature about the AVROC program and actively attempted to recruit. Large groups of protesters gathered on the other side of the tables, handing out anti-war leaflets. Billy led a few of these efforts. Their goal was to block the entrance to the student unions and the approach to our tables. The protesters chanted and yelled so loud we couldn't converse with prospective candidates. They effectively shut us down. I was dressed in blues, navy blues, and Billy in the hippie garb of the 60s, unshaven, wearing loose clothes of earth tones and an angry expression. Angry that we took men's rights away, forced men to go to war, and most importantly, fought an unjust war. What a contradiction. What a contradiction. Loving and caring about someone and being caught in the divide of one of our nation's worst controversies. Not since the Civil War had we seen brother against brother, with Americans dying because of their philosophical differences. What made matters worse, some of those deaths occurred on our own soil at Kent State. We lost 55,000 men on Vietnamese soil. We didn't need to lose any more at home. We had, as a nation, previously disagreed with those in power. This effort differed in strength and conviction of those opposed to our government. The new passionate and aggressive protests was founded in the belief that they could change the edicts of our administration. Cries of bring home the troops and end the war rang out across our nation and in the student unions where I faced down with my brother. In the end, the protesters won and those who fought lost. The year 1967 was to be my last Christmas before being shipped out to Vietnam. Maybe it was to be my last Christmas forever. We were all gathered at the family home in Bradford, Pennsylvania. The family had accepted the fact that I was going to war within a year. We tried to act normal, whatever that was. Christmas with tons of siblings was a festive occasion driven by the young, anticipating Santa's visit, relatives coming in from all parts of the United States, and the picture-perfect setting of the white snow-covered mountains of northern Pennsylvania. Billy's gift to me that year was his last-ditch effort to convince me of his position on the war. We found a quiet moment, had a private conversation in the living room. Billy said, "I don't understand why you feel so strongly you must go. This conflict is a byproduct of US imperialism and not a war to liberate Vietnam or keep the peninsula free of communism. The United States is supporting a failing dictatorship in South Vietnam, and it is not our war." He said our government was forcing young men into danger, not based on Puritan ideals, but on a blatant desire for power. He debated how the outcome had no benefit to the United States and how painful the losses would be. I responded with my patriotism and my belief in my country, right or wrong. I still believed in the ideals of morality and democracy as the foundation of our foreign policy. He saw that his logic, his intellectual opposition to the United States' decision in Indochina to engage in this war, and his overwhelming desire for peace were not going to work, so he tried love. He begged me not to go to war. "You're my brother. I love you. Don't go. I don't want those painful losses we were talking about to end up on our doorstep." That didn't work either. I had to go. Interesting time in the history of our country. I'm very, very pleased to tell you that my special guest today is Brother Billy, and he will get his time now to share on his thoughts and his perspective on the situation. Billy is currently a much sought after defense lawyer in the Kent area, and he works with his daughter Andrea. And I'll tell you what, that apple didn't fall far from the tree. If Andrea was around in the 1970s, she would have joined in the movement, and the war would have ended years earlier. We were divided, but we are brothers. And with that, Billy, what do you got to say for yourself?
Oh, I'm so embarrassed. No. I can tell you, you're correct about Andrea, and I don't know if you know this story, but 20 years later, she was the chair when she was at Kent State of the May 4th task force that ran all of the activities on May 4th. And she had the pleasure of introducing me that year to introduce one of the speakers, Bill Kunstler. And I thought that was that was really a nice moment. At any rate, the only thing I would take objection with in your introduction, Joe, is that we lost and they won. Because I don't think that is necessarily the case. Everybody learned an awful lot. And I don't know what your position is today on that very discussion we had all those years ago about why you thought you had to go and, right or wrong and that kind of stuff. But I know that many, many people that were in your position have come to recognize that the war was not a justified war, that we should not have sacrificed 50,000 plus of our young to the war. And I think in terms of the other side, you know, we fought hard to end the war, and your descriptions of that are pretty clear. ROTC and military recruiting were amongst our demands to say the university shouldn't be complicit with. And so that part was a difficult time. But we never took it personally. For example, and I know, and we're going to get into this later when we do a little question back and forth, but the people that I hung around with, the people that we were involved with, the people that organized and were radical like Kent, never held it against the soldiers, and never took a personal affront at, oh, you were a soldier, and as you put in your book, you know, baby killers and spitting. We would horrified at that. If we saw somebody from our group giving somebody that had been in the military a hard time, they were in for a little education in terms of, no, that's not what we do. That's not what we're about. And I've always felt that, you know, the draft was responsible for a huge percentage of the people, and the other sort of public suasions that were present at the time. And we had in our organization many people that had been over to Vietnam and felt that, you know, that they wanted now to protest the war. So it wasn't a winning and a losing. And the fact of the matter was the war didn't end until Nixon had to get reelected, knowing that he had gotten elected on a promise to end the war, and he hadn't after 4 years, and eventually just threw the towel in because he couldn't have the war going on while he went on to his reelection. But just to tell you a little bit about the lead up, about what was going on at Kent at that time, we had, there were like 3 phases to it. The first was the years leading up to 1970, and that's when SDS was active. That's when huge demonstrations were going. It started off slow, and it gradually grew. And that was an exciting period and an exciting thing to be a part of, because we really felt that we were doing something good, that this war was a horrible war, that not only were we losing our young men and women, but that many, many more Vietnamese were being killed of all ages, and that it was a horror and it should have been stopped, and that there was no solid reason for that happening. The solid reason was economic domination, fighting communism, like very general things, and it had nothing to do with saving the Vietnamese people. It's a bad way to save the Vietnamese people if that's what they were doing. But at any rate, so we felt that we were doing something good. We started organizing. The demonstrations grew. We started off with over 15 people, and that's when I joined, because I didn't start off. When I first went to Kent, I wasn't even virtually aware of what was going on in Vietnam. I saw this group of people protesting, and I got interested because they were getting ridiculed and people were making fun of them. And I thought, boy, they're courageous, and I need to find out what's going on. By doing that and learning about the war, I ended up joining that small group that then grew larger and larger. And when the police in the Chicago Convention in 1968 beat the protesters, it resulted in a huge outcoming of young people that learned about the movement through the actions of the Chicago police. So it was an exciting time to be there. The only trauma that we suffered, of course, was getting arrested, and that wasn't that bad either. But then May 4th came around, and as Governor Rhodes said, we're not here to fix the symptoms. We're here to eradicate the problem. Virtually saying that he was going to shoot people that day, and he did shoot people. And that's when there was a ton of trauma, and that's the shot that's on the screen now as the crowd went up the hill. A peaceful rally was going on. My friend Ken Hammond, and I thought he might be with us today, led the rally on the Commons, and he stood up and said, "Is it the sense of this body that we should strike?" Because the Cambodian invasion had just happened, and campuses around the country were striking in protest of the Cambodian invasion. And everybody cheered, yes, it was. And at that moment, then these guards that you see here came walking across the field. The spot where he made that speech is just as you face the picture to the left. And nobody really thought that they were armed. I was in law school at the time and was a Teamster, and they had been called out against the Teamster because I worked at night unloading freight. And so I was I was involved with the guard the week before, and it turns out against the Teamsters, which were a lot more dangerous group, they didn't their guns weren't even loaded. And but when they came to Kent, they loaded them up. So at any rate, a terribly traumatic day. 13 people shot, 4 of them died, and then it began the aftermath. And the trauma, there was a trauma that affected everybody from that. The campus closed down. There was a diaspora. All of a sudden, all of the people that we knew, they were all worried they were going to be arrested, indicted. They didn't know what was going to happen. So with the campus closed, there were thousands and thousands of Kent students who had participated in the demonstrations that weekend that ended up having completely different lives. Some of them left and never came back to Kent. Some of them left and only came back on May 4th for the commemoration. And so we kept in touch, sort of, separately and infrequently, except we looked forward to those commemorations when we all got back together. Then the grand jury met in Portage County and indicted 25 students and teachers and former students, and charged them with felony crimes, arson, riot, inciting to riot. We actually had a very successful defense of that, where nobody got convicted of a felony and all of the charges ended up getting dismissed. Too long of a story to go into now, but that helped a lot. You want to talk about trauma, the people facing indictment were seriously concerned. At any rate, that's sort of a brief synopsis of what happened during those days. I do want to say that if you want to learn more, there's a movie out right now called Fire in the Heartland, the Kent State Story, and it's showing on public television stations around the country right now. And I helped in the production of that, and it's shown in a lot of markets. We're trying to get it into San Diego right now, and Milwaukee, and some other markets. So it may come, if it hasn't come up in your market, it might soon. There you can get a really full story of what happened. So I'll throw it back to you now, Joe.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And before I give Bill a little bit of a counterpoint here, any of you, please participate. If you have questions, comments, hit the chat button, write a question to Oliver. Oliver's the lead here, and we will see if we can answer them. Also, I promise to keep this to 30 to 40 minutes. We're probably going to break that promise today. We'll go a little bit longer today. And if you have to leave, we understand. This will be re-aired our YouTube channel, our YouTube page, so you can see all of it and anything you may have missed. Now, back to Billy. Billy, my understanding was that the protesters thought they lost because they didn't bring about an end to the war soon enough. They were protesting it. We want peace. We want it over, and we want it over now. Not 1971, not 1972, not 1973. And to me, the fact that they brought about peace was a win. Does that make sense?
Say that last part.
The fact that they brought about peace, that they brought home the troops, was the win.
Well, that was a significant moment, and there's no doubt about it. As a result, I believe, of the demonstrations, as a result of the way the opposition to the war grew, the way that the news media started covering the failures for a change instead of just making everybody think that the war was going to be over shortly, that we got so much more might than those peasants in Vietnam, and we're going to take care of it. All of a sudden, they realized, and as a matter of fact, as you discuss about the Tet Offensive in your book, that was a changing point in the war. And it was right after that that I think Walter Cronkite, who was one of the most trusted newsmen in the country at the time, said, "We've been lied to. We can't win this war. We should end this war." And that was a significant turning point. So yeah, I felt that what we were doing helped bringing that about. And it helped bring an awareness that lasted for many years and still in some senses lasts today. And that is a sense of we can change things. We don't always succeed in changing things, but that our presence is felt and our presence is heard.
It's almost surreal to me now, but you and I stood face to face, looking at each other over this divide in our country. And I never asked you, what did you think of my direction and decision to go to war?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me.
Stop being a liar and be my brother.
All right. What did I think of your decision to go to war? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes, sir.
I am, it's going to lead into my question that I have for you, but I understood what you had done. I understood that when you went to college, you joined a sort of an offshoot of an ROTC program, the Navy Officers Program, and that's what you were going to do. And at the time you embarked on that course, I wasn't necessarily that knowledgeable about the war. And so I don't know that I paid that much attention to it. By the time that you got ready to go, that had changed. And that's when we had the conversation that you're talking about. And I believe that I respected your decision. When I told you that I didn't want you to go because I loved you and I didn't want to see you killed, I meant that. And I thought that you were a product of the same education and the same propaganda, for lack of a better word, that convinced so many people that this was a noble cause and that we were helping the Vietnamese people and we were saving our country from danger in the future. And so how could I not respect it? So I understood that you did that. It didn't change my position, of course. And I think that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. What was that going to lead into for me?
My question to you is, what were you thinking about the war? Were you thinking, it seems to me there are a couple of possibilities. One of them is that you were just following a natural progression, which you describe in the book, which very interestingly. Or, and what did you think about the purpose of the war? What did you think that you were going to accomplish? What did you think was the purpose of you taking this enormous risk?
I think a great deal of it was a normal progression, because in my belief system was we have a voice and our voices were heard, and the administration that we put in place elected to go to war, made that decision. It was my job as a citizen to support. Plus, I did believe that ideologically there was going to be some win. There was going to be some win for us. Slow the spread of communism, free up the peninsula, a number of things that I thought were very positive ideals, in addition to that normal progression that you were talking about.
Can I ask you one small follow-up here?
Yes.
What do you think now, looking back at the war, the war that you participated in? What do you think about exactly what you were thinking then? Do you still hold those beliefs?
I would have been standing beside you on the other side of the table.
Say no more.
Billy, you mentioned that Andrea chaired a committee for the anniversary programs. This was the 50th. This was going to be a big one, wasn't it? Did you have a lot of things planned? I know a lot of it's been canceled, but is there anything that's still available that people could go to get some of this history?
The university has a virtual commemoration program. It actually has a 12-minute clip of that movie I was talking about as part of it. I don't know, I haven't looked recently, but I think it may be still up. And that is, if you go to the Kent State website and click on commemoration, there's a flag that shows you about commemoration, that you can see the activities that went on for about 3 hours that afternoon. So there was a fair amount of celebration. It was, I don't want to use the word celebration, but commemoration, where people talked, and there were, as I say, various things that showed up, and good speakers. But it wasn't the same as it would have been. I personally felt very disappointed in this sense, that I was going to see my old friends. You know, there were people there that we bonded, you know, we became friends for life, and we bonded, and we don't see each other that often. And I was thinking when it was going on, I wish that I was walking around the campus with my old buds and going down to Ray's afterwards to, you know, get a sandwich and a few beers and talk. And it wasn't happening, and it may never happen, and we may never see each other, and many of us in that group again. So that's a bit traumatic. But there is that, go to the website of the university and you can find what went on in the commemoration. And it's going to be on for a while, but I don't know how long, but I think it still is.
Okay. Billy, did you have anything else for me before I open it up to the?
No, I don't. I can't think of anything right now.
I'd like to take objection to one point you made, if I could. And you said that the people that you hung with, the people that you marched with, the people that you went shoulder to shoulder with, did not speak poorly of or belittle those who served.
I did.
Okay. I want everybody to know that is not my experience. That is not my experience at home at all. I came home. I could not wear my uniform out in public. We were belittled, humiliated, spit on. We were called baby killers. Billy mentioned that term. It was a very, very difficult time. So after spending a couple of years over in Vietnam, dealing with that, then we came home and were faced with the rejection from our own folks here. In the book, I make the comment, I felt safer in Vietnam than I did on Main Street, USA. And I think that's a bad commentary. I wish I didn't feel that or have to say that. And I'm so happy to see that we are treating our servicemen and women completely different, saying thank you for your service. I'll just tell you a quick little story. I'm on a plane in Chicago, and the pilot comes back and sees a man in uniform and says, "Oh, I've got a seat in first class open. It's yours. Thank you for your service." Well, where's my seat? You know, I'm in a restaurant and a man comes over and picks up the tab of a serviceman who's eating alone and says, "I'll get this. Thank you for your service." Do you know how long it was before anybody said, "Thank you for your service" to me directly?
40 some years.
40 years. 40 years. And I was in a dessert place, and the owner served Iraq. The dessert restaurant was owned by 5 medics from Iraq. And so one of the owners came over and he was chatting us up and talking about the name of the restaurant. Well, how did it come by? And the name was Heaven Sent. How did that name come about? And he said, when we would meet people on the battlefield who were injured, they would look up at us and say, "Am I going home or am I going to God?" And he said, Either way, you're heaven sent. And that's where the name came from. Well, in the course of this conversation, I gave him, I said, well, yeah, I served in Vietnam. Thinking nothing of it, went and sat down. My friend and I finished our dessert and we're on our way out the door. And he hands me a little white box with a red ribbon full of truffles. And he says, thank you for your service. That, I want you to know, brings tears to my eyes every single time. Just that little gesture. So don't forget our servicemen and women. Oliver, how are we doing? Got some questions?
Oh yeah, we got quite a few.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So we'll start. I'll try and get these sequentially. So the first one that I got was for you, Joe, and it's then you're reading. You say that the protesters won and those who fought lost, and so they were hoping that you could maybe elaborate on that and maybe speak to what you mean there.
Okay. And Billy and I did talk about that a little bit. I say the protesters won because they accomplished their end goal, which was to end the war. Now, I know many protesters do not believe that because their goal was to end it faster. Remember, I said it was a much more aggressive campaign. It was a much more forceful campaign against the U.S., the U.S. administration, and they wanted it to end sooner. But I still say they won. They won. They got the war over one way or another. And for that, I'm grateful. I say that those who fought lost because Vietnam vets are still fighting. They're still fighting to this day. They're on the street fighting for health care, shelter, medical and mental services. They're still fighting. We have not found a way to bring them home. That's why I say they lost.
Mm. Okay. Okay, so here's another one, and I think this maybe kind of dovetails into that, and it's, so in hindsight, do you have any regrets for your decision to go to Vietnam? And then just sort of as a follow-up question, were you drafted or did you volunteer for officer training?
I'll answer the easy one first. I volunteered.
Okay.
And yes, I have regrets. Yes, I have regrets. If I'd have known how much my life was going to change, how devastated I was going to be when I came home, I would have had second thoughts. I came home with a whole different perspective on the world, life, me. I had no idea who I was or where I was. I was a completely lost soul, and I had a great deal of difficulty walking through that in the 70s. Also, I don't know if all of you know this, but I spent most of my time at Da Nang Air Force Base and was exposed to Agent Orange. Agent Orange is a herbicide that the Army used to clear the foliage around the base. Since I got home, I've had over 12 surgeries on my face. Most of the left side of my face was removed due to that exposure, due to a skin cancer that I believe was caused by that. The military has not owned that part yet, but don't malign my VA. I love my VA. They've taken wonderful care of me. But you think you're going there for one reason. You think you're going to face one enemy, and you find out you have to face many, many more, and the demons that go with them.
I see. Okay, well, here's another one, and I think this one is maybe for both you two. So this one is from Charlie Whitaker, and it's so you guys have both spoken a lot about the winning and losing elements or of this time period. So the question is, are the country's actions since that time, when it comes to war and peace, do you think it's an indication of a win or a loss? And by that, I think it's meant to say, do you think that we learned from this experience or did we not?
Billy, I'm tossing it to you.
I don't think, I think that if you look at the amount of war that has occurred since Vietnam, it's almost perpetual war these days. Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, we're bombing over in Africa. I mean, it's insane. And somehow it's getting together. It's not getting opposed with the strength that is putting an end to it. So we felt that our demonstrations made a difference. Well, the people in power learned how to respond to that as well. So when the invasion of Iraq first took place, there was the largest demonstration in the history of the world in Washington, D.C. And instead of attacking it and instead of stopping it, they let everybody march, and they watched from inside their White House or various offices and homes and said, have a good time. The demonstration was over. Millions of people went back to their homes and the war went on. And that was a real fear of those demonstrations back in Vietnam, in the Vietnam days. And they responded in part by trying to break them up, by trying to stop them, and obviously by the time Kent came around, firing on them. And I thought, I'm disappointed that it doesn't seem to have not only not put an end to war, but in fact allowed it to be waged with a little more freedom. And it's impossible to believe that a war would have gone on like the way Iraq and Afghanistan have for all of these years, the longest wars in the history of the world, virtually. But I do agree with what you said in terms of the win part of it, that part, and that is that there are voices in the streets, and they do have an effect on many issues. And I think healthcare could very well be one of those that ultimately the healthcare system will change to benefit everybody.
Joe, do you think we learned from this experience?
I think Billy said it beautifully. I think there's nothing to add to that. So let's move on.
Okay. Okay, so here's another one for Joe. Do you still talk to other Vietnam vets? And if so, what do they say today, looking back on that time period?
I have never talked to, seen, engaged with in any way, shape, or form anybody that I served with. We came home, it was like we dispersed into the ether. I have not had any contact with anybody I served with. Now, please recognize too that over 65 of them died. So nobody wants to talk about it. So no, the answer to your question is no.
Okay. Okay, so I have one for Bill. Seems like it's a pretty brief one, and it's, is there a memorial at Kent State?
Oh, yes, there is. They've actually built a center, a May 4th center, which has the history and pictures and publications that all took place about the events, about the war, about the follow-up. And they also have an actual sculpture memorial. And then in the parking lot where the shootings took place, all of the people were killed in a parking lot down the hill from where the guard shot. And the parking spaces where each individual was shot have been blocked off. And there's a memorial to each of the 4 people that died in that parking lot that they say will remain forever.
That's nice. So I think this one kind of goes into like remembrance, right? And sort of honoring that time. So another question is, what do you both hope that future generations would learn from, this experience on both sides?
Well, my number one wish would be that all of us, young people, old people, doesn't matter to me, but that we learn diplomacy first. War is the absolute last thing we should engage in, because there is no way to measure the cost of war. There is no way to know its effect on generations and generations to come. No, there is no excuse for war. Diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. Billy?
And you're right, Joe, when you were talking about the trauma, that you were completely changed. And we see it happen into a whole new generation of people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And you can see the trauma that they suffer in some of the ways that it explodes individually. But even those that don't engage in behavior that is harmful to themselves, they suffer daily. And I know a number of Vietnam vets that I'm very close with, and they talk to me about their post-traumatic stress disorder. They talk to me about how to this day there are certain things they can do and can't do, and certain things that trigger emotions that they need to control. So that you're correct about that. But when I look at what I think can be done and what needs to be done and what needs to be learned, is people have to pay attention to what's going on. Had people paid attention to what was actually happening in Vietnam, it probably might not have happened. You know, there would have been a groundswell that, well, wait a minute, they would demand answers and not just accept right or wrong. We got to believe what our leaders tell us. And even today, people vote for choices that don't help them, that are against their interest, because they haven't been educated in what the policies that are espoused actually mean. And years ago, actually, before Vietnam even, people paid attention. Before television, people paid attention, and they had I think a wider knowledge of what was happening and a more informed vote. Our vote today is less informed, and the only reason it isn't even more less informed is that people are still in the streets. People are still bringing attention to it, and I think that's what every citizen has to do. They have an obligation to educate themselves on what the reality is rather than what the hype is.
And let me just make one more comment on the change aspect here. In the book, I say one of my resentments was that I came home so radically changed, and those who awaited my homecoming didn't change at all. I was furious that you didn't change. I was furious that you couldn't, that your perspective hadn't been changed like mine. Now, there's no reason for that to be a valid thought, because you weren't there. You didn't go. And I understand that completely. But we were so radically changed, we could not come back and slip back into the way it used to be. It just could not happen. There was no way. And there was this terrible resentment. And I'm speaking for me personally, so, okay.
Well, I didn't want you to go.
I should have listened, Billy. All right, we've already made that point. I should have listened. What was that? 1968. So that's 53 years ago.
Yeah.
All right, Oliver. Anything else?
Well, I have two more. One of them is actually from me, and it's for you, Joe. Why do you think it took people so long to thank you for your service?
Oh, there was a the strong anti-war sentiment in this country was very, very high. And the final straw that broke the camel's back was the massacre at My Lai. And I don't know if anybody knows about the massacre at My Lai, but it's where the troops went in and killed hundreds of men, women, and children. They just went in and decimated the village. And so that in part is where the name Baby Killer comes from, because of that operation. And so people were disgusted with that. People were disgusted with the way the war was handled, the casualties, both collateral damage and intentional, and were very, very upset with it at all times. So when they saw us, we personified, no matter whether we were there or not. I was not at My Lai, but we personified that picture they had in their head of the baby killers indiscriminate killing, et cetera, et cetera.
I see. So this is a follow-up from someone in the audience, I think, to that question, and it's even though people are thanking military, service members for their service, do you think we are doing a good job of taking care of our veterans?
Wow. I know there's been a lot of complaints, and I know there's a lot of issues. I have been taken care of 100% very, very well since I came home. I had one beef with the VA back at the very beginning over the cancer and its relationship to service orientation, but I've had a very good time. A lot of the problems that we're seeing in our VA system is administrative. I recently went through, and I'll tell you this, I recently went through some health issues. I had my doctor on video chat 4 times in a week and a half. I had messaging system with him back and forth, confidential messaging system, and he ordered prescriptions sent to me directly to my home. I have no complaint. I think we need to learn how to use the medical system that's been provided and then find out where the real flaws are and work on them. More needs to be done. But the VA medical system treats more people than every other hospital in the United States.
Okay. Well, for now, I'm all out of questions, but I think maybe we can give people, a minute or so to type if they have any remaining questions. I know I have one, and it's, where can we buy this wonderful book? This beautiful, perfectly written book.
Thanks for the plug, Oliver. Just to be transparent here, Oliver works for me. My brother's a lawyer. He's on here. I gotta be up front here. The book is called The Day Before I Died. It is available on most of your outlets. The best way to get a link to it is to go to jfwhitaker.com. You'll see all the sites that are handling the book, and you can click on it and purchase it. Okay, that would be the easiest. And then when you do us a favor. Please write an honest review, put it on Amazon, put it on wherever you want to put it on. Again, we're looking for feedback, we're looking for help. My goal is to circle back around as soon as we're allowed out of the house and talk about these subjects with people who are still suffering. One of the commendations or comments I got on the book was a lady wrote to me and said, I thought I knew what this, she knew me for 35 years. She said, I thought I knew what this book was going to be about, and I didn't. And I read it, and I want you to know you really helped me with my brother who served in Vietnam and is still silent today.
Just as a note, there's a comment in the chat right now, and it's an Amazon link, and that goes to the book. So you don't have to do any searching; it's already there for you.
All right, let's wrap this up. I appreciate everybody's tolerance and patience. And yes, Billy and I disagreed. Yes, Billy and I were on opposite sides, but we didn't make it personal, and we didn't take it personally. And that's not what I see happening today. And in the book, I say, have we traded the rockets and Agent Orange of Vietnam for hollow point words and toxic rhetoric? When did it become tyranny to disagree? When did it become a crime to let our voices be heard? 55,000 men died in Vietnam, many more in the wars before and after, so we could have the freedoms that we have. Let your voice be heard. Let your voice be heard in peaceful demonstrations and rallies around the country, and most importantly, in your vote. Everyone matters or no one matters. Thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate your support.